Alex Pereira became one of the most unlikely champions in UFC history after somehow finding a way to TKO his great rival Israel Adesanya in the final round of their title fight. But now that he's a champ, few would argue that he isn't the single greatest striker in the sport. And that left hook, yeah, is the most dangerous weapon in MMA. Here's what some of Poatan's fellow fighters think about him and his rapid rise to the top of the fight game.
It's time!
Sean O'Malley. Sean O'Malley is a guy who knows what it's like to tower over the other fighters in his division. But even though he himself is one of the most oversized bantamweights in the game, Sugar Sean can't get over how massive Alex Pereira is for 185 pounds. At 6'4", he is the same height as his great rival Israel Adesanya. But on closer inspection, you will notice that there are some major differences there in terms of sheer mass. Pereira looks like a large light heavyweight, like he's walking around a solid 10 to 15 pounds heavier than Israel. Sure, size isn't everything in the fight game, but Poatan's imposing physical frame really does put his insane punching power into greater perspective. Sean Strickland. Out of all of the fighters within that UFC middleweight top 15, the UFC could not have given Alex Pereira a more perfect stylistic matchup than Sean Strickland. It's not that Strickland isn't capable of fighting the type of fight that could have won him the bout. No, it's the fact that Strickland was all but certain to make the silly mistake of standing with a fearsome Poatan. His pride would not allow him to shoot for the takedown. Strickland is a hard sparrer who takes pride in fighting the way he believes is most honorable. But within one round of action with Pereira, Strickland ate a massive left hook and was quickly dispatched. Speaking about the fight during a later interview, Strickland explained how sure, he might have had a better shot at winning had he decided to fight smarter, but it doesn't seem like he's going to change his approach anytime soon. Love him or hate him, it takes some serious stones to get out there against one of the greatest kickboxers on planet Earth and stand with him just so we can prove a point. Daniel Cormier. Daniel Cormier knows a thing or two about coming up second best in a rivalry. Okay, of course there was a lot more to DC's career than the losing records he posted against Jon Jones and Stipe Miocic. But his takes on Alex Pereira's rivalry with Israel Adesanya is certainly an interesting one. In his eyes, Poatan made this rematch happen far quicker than expected, simply by expressing his interest in other fighters outside of Adesanya. All of a sudden, people were talking about Pereira versus Robert Whittaker, Khamzat Chimaev, even the newly crowned 205-pound champion Jamahal Hill. For Adesanya, losing the chance for a rematch could have been a major blow to his legacy. So according to Cormier, there's a chance that Poatan played this situation perfectly to lure Izzy into one more showdown against him. Guys like Whittaker and Chimaev will definitely be tougher stylistic matchups for the champ than his old rival Stylebender. So maybe there is something to this. Khamzat Chimaev. Before the rematch with Adesanya was signed, it was clear that the welterweight and middleweight hopper Khamzat Chimaev was very interested in taking on the newly crowned Pereira. Look, we all know just how devastating a striker Poatan is, but in the world of wrestling and grappling, it's pretty clear that he is quite inexperienced. A guy like Khamzat Chimaev, who has some of the nastiest wrestling in the business, would be favored to do huge damage to Pereira if he got a hold of him. The problem? Well, every fight starts on the feet. Chimaev himself seems to think that Pereira is an easy outing for him, backing himself to win the fight in just one round. But if he can't avoid that left hook, a fight like this could spell trouble for this top-ranked welterweight contender. Still, you have to think that Khamzat would open as a favorite over the middleweight champion, even as a rising welterweight, simply because of his insanely aggressive pursuit of the takedown. Bess Rutten. If Bess Rutten is complimenting you on your left hook, you know you're doing something right. This legendary fighting icon and former UFC heavyweight champion was renowned for his gut-busting body punches during the 1990s. And after transitioning into a role as commentator for Pride, it was clear that Rutten was just as sharp as an analyst as he was in the ring himself. Watching a guy like Poatan do his thing must be an absolute joy for someone as experienced as Bess. And in his eyes, Pereira's lethal left hook is by far and away the biggest threat to Israel Adesanya in the rematch. And ahead of their first fight in MMA, Rutten clearly saw the danger levels every time Izzy narrowly managed to move out of its way. In the end, it was that exact weapon that led to Adesanya's demise, kicking off the barrage of strikes that resulted in the TKO. And who can forget about that infamous highlight reel KO Pereira scored over Izzy from their kickboxing days? Is there a more devastating weapon in the mixed martial arts today? If you can think of one, let us know in the comment section below. Robert Whittaker. Sean O'Malley isn't the only one who is totally shocked by the sheer size of the champion of the middleweight division. It's easy to forget now, but Robert Whittaker used to fight in the welterweight division, posting a decent record before he decided to move up to 185 pounds. But even now, Whittaker is by no means undersized for the division. In fact, the way he has grown into himself as a middleweight is really the gold standard for how to step up in weight. Just look at how he dealt with the takedown attempts of guys like Yoel Romero and Derek Brunson. Anyway, on an interesting note, Whittaker makes it clear that he sees Pereira as an easier matchup for himself than Israel Adesanya. Whatever his reasoning might be, he appears to see something in Pereira's stance and likely his inexperience on the mat that leads him to believe that he should be favored. Bobby Knuckles has the takedowns to really be a danger to the newly crowned champ. And while he has gone 0-2 against Israel Adesanya, if Izzy loses again, perhaps the Reaper's path back to UFC Gold will be made clear. Michael Bisping. You can always count on Michael Bisping to make an interesting point about the middleweight division. It just seems like the Count has an added level of interest when it comes to studying and critiquing the fighters who compete in his old weight class. And sure enough, on the subject of Pereira vs Adesanya second, he did not disappoint. Most people have zoned in on the knockouts that Poatan has been able to score over Izzy across two different sports. But here's where it gets interesting. Bisping believes that Israel could have finished Pereira at the very end of round 1. You remember that sequence where he very clearly stunned the title challenger? Well, Bisping believes that Adesanya will take some real confidence from that, and that Pereira is going to really have to work on his sense of urgency this time around. He can't let crucial rounds slip past him this time if he wants to win. Sure, Poatan managed to find the perfect punch in the dying embers of the final round last time, but if Adesanya comes in as improved as we think he will, relying on that one-hitter-quitter shot might not be enough for the champion. Only time will tell, but you gotta admit that Bisping knows his stuff. Paul Felder and Joe Rogan. If you put two veteran commentators in a room together, they're going to make some insightful points. And sure enough, when Paul Felder appeared on Joe Rogan's podcast, the two engaged in a memorable discussion about all things MMA. Rogan, as always, was pretty in awe of Pereira's masterful striking ability, and in particular that beautiful left hook shot that has been the bane of many fighters in the past. But Felder added that things could not have played out any better for Pereira. Not only does he get yet another big money fight against a guy in Adesanya that he has comfortably beaten in the past, but he also gets to delay going up against the many powerful wrestlers who are waiting in the wings for a chance to exploit his inexperience. Izzy might be a dangerous matchup in his own way, but apart from the occasional takedown attempt, he's more than likely just going to stand in front of Pereira, something that will give him the best shot at finding a home for his best punch. Israel Adesanya. Israel Adesanya was as calm and composed as ever as he took questions about his upcoming rematch with his rival Alex Pereira. Now faced with the prospect of going 0-4 against Poatan across two sports, Izzy seemed in no way flustered by how unsuccessful he has been in there with the champion. He even made a point of saying that he will do far less talking this time around, simply because Alex now fully holds the bragging rights. Sounds like Israel is adhering to schoolyard rules on this one. But either way, it's clear that Stylebender is simply focusing on his preparation and training, rather than trying to build up any sort of beef between the two of them. It seems like there's respect there, and in this interview, he makes it clear that Pereira has every right to see him as the villain in his own story. Say what you want about Adesanya, but he was very quick to sign on the dotted line in his attempt to get his belt back. And love him or hate him, that takes some real courage. Let's just wait and see how well placed the courage actually is.